Hilchos Beis Habechirah Perek Shmini, the laws of the chosen house, the holy temple, the Beis Hamikdash, chapter 8, the final chapter of these set of laws. As we're going to see, the chapter is going to be occupied with the topic of Shmiras Hamikdash, the guarding that would happen every night by the Kohanim and the Levites. All night they would guard the Beis Hamikdash. It was an expression of honor to the Beis Hamikdash. The Rambam puts this chapter at the very end because, of course, only once you have a Beis Hamikdash can you dictate the laws that relate to honoring it. On the other hand, the reason why it's in this set of laws at all, this set of laws seems to be about the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Why do we have laws about guarding the Beis Hamikdash in this set of halachos? So the Rebbe explained this once, tying it into a piece of commentary that we mentioned in chapter 1, where when the Rambam described the basic mitzvah of having a Beis Hamikdash, he described it not as building. The mitzvah is not to build the Beis Hamikdash. The mitzvah is that there should be a Beis Hamikdash, what's called in halachic lexicon or yeshivish lexicon, the nifal, the result. The mitzvah is the result. We have to do what it takes to achieve the result that there should be a proper home for Hashem. And so in that way, guarding the Beis Hamikdash falls right into that category, because as we're going to see later, it is through the guarding of the Beis Hamikdash that full honor is expressed to the home, and the very definition of the structure of the Beis Hamikdash is changed when it has guards, as the Rambam will very soon tell us. And that's why it fits into a set of laws that's all about the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, because guarding it literally enhances the structure. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Shmiras Hamikdash mitzvah saseh. Guarding the Beis Hamikdash is a positive commandment. Even though, practically speaking, there's no fear of enemies or of robbers. Usually you guard a place because you're afraid somebody might attack. You're afraid somebody might steal. When it came to the Beis Hamikdash, there was no such fear. And the commentaries talk about why. Why was there no fear of thieves? Let's say you would have left the Beis Hamikdash unguarded. Why was there no fear of thieves? The Mefarshim give two answers. One answer is because we have a rule that says, Ein anios b'makom ashiros. We don't deal in poverty when we're talking about a place of richness. Even if thieves would come and steal some things, the temple treasury was rich. They'd just buy other ones. It wouldn't cost them anything. The other explanation is that simply the gates were locked. A thief couldn't get in. The difference between them being whether or not it's even potentially possible for thievery to make a difference. Right? According to the first way, we're saying that the thieves could get in, just that if they get in, it wouldn't make a difference, wouldn't make a dent. Second way says thievery was impossible because the gates were locked. At any rate, the Rebbe ties that into a much bigger argument when it comes to Mashiach times. If when Mashiach comes, the evil nature in some animals or the like, are they going to be completely eradicated or they're going to be just subdued? It has to do with these two ways. If it's possible to damage and they just practically don't damage, or the whole possibility of damaging is going to go away. And we'll talk more about that, God willing, I guess in about a year and a half when we get to the very end of the Rambam. The point that Rambam is making over here, even though practically there's no fear for which you would have to do regular guarding, we still have to do the guarding of the Beis Hamikdash. She'ein shmirasoi ela kavod loi. Because the guarding of the Beis Hamikdash was nothing but honor for it. Eino dome palterin sheyesh alav shemrin lepalterin she'ein alav shemrin. You can't compare a palace that has guards to a palace that doesn't have guards. Tying into the word I was saying before, it literally enhances the structure. The palace becomes a more important, a more prestigious palace when there's guards that are guarding it, even if the guards aren't necessary for the practical elements of the guarding. Just the fact that they're there outside the structure makes the structure look more important. Halacha beizu shmira zu mitzvasa kol halayla. The Rambam adds a detail. The mitzvah of this guarding is all night. V'hashomrim heim hakoyanim v'halavim. And who are the guards? The guards are both the Kohanes and the Levites. Shenemar. The Rambam proves this from a series of verses. It says in one pasuk, Ve'ata uvanecha itach lifnei oyhel ha'edos. You and your sons with you, Hashem was talking to Aaron, you and your sons with you should be in front of the tent of testimony. Kiloimar, which means to say, Atem tiyu shemrim loi. You are the ones that should be guarding it. Which from this verse we learn that the Kohanim have to be part of the guards. V'harei nemar. And then it says in another verse, and this is talking about the Leviim, The beginning words say, V'nilvu alecha, the Leviim should attach themselves to the Kohanim. V'shamru es mishmeres hayel moed, they should guard the guarding of the tent of meeting. This is the verse that indicates that the Leviim should be the guards. V'nemar, and then it says a third verse. And the way it's quoted in the Rambam here is a little different to the way it's on the screen, the actual pasuk. I'll first read the Rambam, then we'll go to the pasuk. The Rambam quotes it as saying, V'hachainim, and those who dwelled, Kedma lifnei hayel moed mizracha, to the east, in the front of the tent of meeting, was Moshe ve'Aaron uvanav, was Moshe, Aaron and his children, Shemrei mishmeres hakodesh. They were the ones who were charged with guarding the holiness. So again, little variation in the actual pasuk. V'hachainim lifnei hamishkan, the ones who camped in front of the Mishkan, Kedma lifnei el moed mizracha, Moshe ve'Aaron uvanav, Shemrei mishmeres hamikdash. The Rambam quotes it as kodesh. Here it says mikdash. The point is that from this third verse we learn, even though you have one verse for the Kohen and one verse for the Leviim, this verse teaches us that the Kohanim and the Leviim were separate. As we're going to see, there was places where the Kohanim guarded and places where the Leviim guarded. They weren't supposed to mix. It's Moshe, Aaron, and his children. They all stand separately. Halacha gimel v'im bitlו shmira. If they canceled this guarding, if they didn't do their job, avru b'lei saseh, they transgressed a negative commandment. Shenemar, as it says, ushmartem es mishmeres hakodesh. There's another verse. You shall guard the guarding of the holiness. Uviloshen shmira azharahi. Whenever Torah uses the word shmira, to guard, to observe something, it indicates a negative commandment. Halamadata, from this you learn, sheshmirase mitzvah saseh, ubitul shmirase mitzvah leisaseh. Guarding it is a positive commandment. Canceling the guarding is a negative commandment. Now the Rebbe has a very interesting talk where he examines an important nuance here in the halacha. The Rambam in Halacha Aleph gives us the law. The mitzvah is to guard it. Then in Halacha Beis he says the mitzvah is to guard it all night. Then he adds who needs to guard it, and only then does he bring the verses. All the verses are just brought to prove who needs to guard it. He doesn't bring it as a proof to the very mitzvah of guarding. This is in contrast, by the way, to the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam's other book, where he enumerates the list of all the 613 mitzvahs, where over there, he does associate the verses with the actual commandment of guarding the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe asks, why the difference? To which the Rebbe answers that there are two ways to look at the obligation of guarding the Beis HaMikdash. Is it an extension of the cheftza, the object of the Beis HaMikdash? The Beis HaMikdash's structure itself requires guarding. Or is it an extension of the gavra, of the persons or people working in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim and the Leviim? One of their jobs was to guard the Beis HaMikdash. So is it an extension of the structure or of the people's jobs? And basically, it depends on why you're guarding it. If you're guarding it to honor the Beis HaMikdash, so then obviously you're doing it for the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. If you're guarding the Beis HaMikdash, let's say, to stop the wrong people from coming in, then it has to do with the people that are in charge. And since the Rambam clearly says in Halacha Aleph that it's kavod loy, it's about establishing honor for the Beis HaMikdash's structure itself, plus the very fact that the Rambam puts it in these laws that are all about the structure of the Beis HaMikdash that we spoke about before, it's clear that the Rambam in Sefer Hayad over here, in his work here, it follows the understanding that it's an extension of the cheftza. It's an extension of the structure of the Beis HaMikdash to be guarded. And therefore, since the verses in the Torah only talk about the people, he couldn't bring that verse and attach it to the obligation of the guarding. It only has to do with the people that are guarding it. But then once you establish that, you have to ask yourself another question. Why did they only guard it at night? If the guarding is expression of honor for the Beis HaMikdash, you ever go to Buckingham Palace? They don't have guards just by night. And believe me, it's the same thing. They don't care about thieves and all that stuff. That's not why they have all these guards. The guards are there for the honor of the palace. And they have guards there all day. So why doesn't the Beis HaMikdash have guards all day? How come is it only by night? By the way, in the verses, it doesn't say anything about night. Sounds like it should be all day. So there is an expression in one of the commentaries that says that during the daytime, the very fact that the Kohanim were walking back and forth in the service of the temple itself was the honor of Hashem. The question then would be, though, how so? And how does that relate to the honor that was accorded through the guarding? And the Rebbe explains a novelty. He says, let's get to the core of the guarding of the Beis HaMikdash. Yes, it's an honor for the structure, but how? How is the guarding an honor for the structure? The Rebbe says the guarding is an honor for the structure because it shows that we never divert our attention from the Beis HaMikdash. We call it halacha hesach hadas. By guarding it, we're showing, actively, we're demonstrating that it's always on our minds. It shows how elevated it is in our eyes, shows how important it is in our eyes. And so by daytime, when the Kohanim were occupied in the service of the temple, service in the temple, as we're going to see in the laws that talk about the services, required a lot of focus, a lot of mental attention. There was no way to divert your mind from the Beis HaMikdash while you were doing the service. And so, that's what the meaning of that commentary is, through the Kohanim walking back and forth, that was the honor because they were expressing how they're not diverting their attention at any moment by being fully involved and focused on the service. By nighttime, there's no service. We're going to see there's some things that you can offer if sacrifice began to burn by day, so that the fats can continue to burn by night. But there's no active service being done by night. And therefore, you have to have the guarding as the demonstration of the lack of hesach hadas, of the lack of diverting their attention. And the Rebbe basically says this can actually lead to a very major ramification in practical law, that they actually wouldn't have to guard the Beis HaMikdash all night. They can just guard it up until the time that the preparations for the morning sacrifice began, which was at the last stages of the night. Because at that point, the Kohanim walking around and they're occupied in the service of the temple, they already are not diverting their minds. And so the guarding job could be over at that point. Another interesting sikha that Rebbe once delivered about this guarding thing in 1990 was about how this mitzvah should apply nowadays. And the Rambam says that the guarding is an honor for the Beis HaMikdash. Now, of course, we're not talking about an honor for the building itself. The building doesn't need honor. It's because of Hashem's presence in the building. Kind of like what Rambam said yesterday, that the fear of the Holy Temple is not from the building, but it's from the one who commanded about the fear. It should therefore follow that because the place is inherently holy and inherently godly always, even after the Churban, the mitzvah of guarding should still apply, even after the Churban. So why don't we find Jews, especially recently, very righteous Jews, the Rebbe asked about the Chabad Rebbes, how come the Chabad Rebbes didn't put in some effort to see to it that there should be guarding people around the area of the Beis HaMikdash to express that honor, especially considering the fact that we believe Mashiach's coming any day, and we're going to have Kohen and they're going to be trained to guard. The mitzvah is going to apply right away, in its fullest sense, so why not be ready? So the Rebbe says that clear from Jewish history that right after the Churban, to have Jews go back up there and guard the temple was literally pikuach nefesh. It would have put your life in danger. And so because for the first immediate era after the Churban they couldn't do it, so we have an halachos called kevan de itche itche. Once something is pushed off, it's pushed off. And it never recovered. Because in the beginning it was literally tied up with survival, so it just kind of faded out. And the truth is, the Rebbe says that even nowadays, when it seems that we're more free from our enemies, our Torah guarantees that Esav Soini Yaakov, there's always some hatred for the Jewish people, and if we would get up there and demonstrate this kind of guarding thing, it could arouse some negative responses from our enemies, so we don't do it nowadays at all. Halacha Dalet. Mitzvahs Shmirasai. The mitzvah of the guarding is Sheyiyu HaKohanim Shemrim Mibifnim V'Halaviyim Mibachutz. The Kohanim were supposed to guard the temple from the inside of the structure, and the Leviim would stand guard on the outside. 24 groups, it wasn't 24 people, according to Rambam, 24 groups would guard it every night, constantly, in 24 locations in the Holy Temple. So you can kind of see them just placed. This is in the actual temple, and then it's all around on the Temple Mount. And the Rambam will detail them very specifically. The Kohanim would guard in 3 places, and the Leviim would stand guard in 21 places. Where would exactly they stand guard? Kohanim hayushemrim, says the Rambam, the Kohanim would stand guard bebeis avtinos, ubebeis hanitzutz, ubebeis hamoiket. In 3 places. One was called the house or the attic of Avtinas. Second one was called the house or the attic of the nitzutz, the spark. And the third one was called the beis hamoiket, the chamber of the fire. Beis Avtinas ubeis hanitzutz, the Rambam immediately defines what these were. Beis Avtinas and beis hanitzutz hayu aliyos bnuyos bitzad שערי העזרה. They were little attics or little structures built to the side of the gates leading into the temple courtyard. In these places they would place very young Kohanim, kind of Kohanim in training. Beis HaMoiked, the house of the fire, we discussed this the other day, Kippah. It had a dome on top, Ubayis Godel Haya, it was a large room, Mukaf Roivdin Shel Even, surrounded by rows of stone coming out of the walls, ledges of stone. The older members of the daily watch of the Kohanim who served that day in the temple would sleep there, because there was 24 groups of Kohanim that would rotate every week, and of the weekly rotation, every day a different group served, so the elders of the daily group would sleep in these little beds on the sides of the room. They held the keys to the temple courtyard in their homes. Now, talking about sleeping Kohanim, the Rambam goes into this a little bit. Halacha vav, lo hayu hakohanim hashemrim yeshenim bebigdei kahuna. The Kohanim who were on guard duty were not allowed to sleep in their priestly garments. Ela mekapli noisan umanichi noisan keneged rasheyan. They would fold them up, put them opposite or beside their heads. V'loivshin bigdei atzmon, and they would wear their own clothing. V'yeshenim al haaretz. They would sleep on the ground. Kederech kol shemrei chatzeres hamlachim shelo yishnu al amitos. Like anybody that guards the courtyard of a king who wouldn't sleep on beds. Now the implication is that the Kohanim on guard duty could sleep though, which makes no sense. The whole thing of guarding is to show respect for the temple. That wouldn't be fulfilled by sleeping Kohanim. Plus, we're going to see in a minute that if Kohanim would be found asleep on duty, they would be beaten, and it wouldn't be pretty. So the Mishnah Lamelech explains that the Rambam before said it wasn't individual people that were guarding, it was groups of people. So not the whole group had to stand watch all night. They could rotate. And when they rotated, some of them would go to sleep. When they went to sleep, the Rambam is saying they shouldn't sleep in their priestly garments, rather in their own garments. And not on a bed, but on the floor. Halacha zayin eira keri le'echad mihen, if one of them experienced a seminal emission at night, he was disqualified obviously from serving anymore in the temple, he was impure. He would go in the tunnel way, the passageway under the ground, because the tunnels that open into the Temple Mount never became holy, as we saw 2 days ago. He would go to the mikvah. There was an underground mikvah, as we learned the other day, under the Beis Hamikdash structure. He would go back and sit by his brothers, the Kohanim, until the gates were opened in the morning, and then he'd go out and go on his way till he recovers from his ritual impurity. That's as far as the Kohanim's place of guarding. Where did the Leviim stand watch? It says the Rambam, al chamisha שערי harabayis. First of all, by the 5 gates of the Temple Mount, 2 on the south, 1 on the north, east, and the west. They would also stand watch on the 4 corners of the Temple Mount from the inside, over here, 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 and there. They would also stand watch on the 4 corners of the temple courtyard of the Azara, but on the outside. Because you can't sit in the courtyard, and they might have had to sit, which wouldn't be allowed. And by the 5 gates of the temple courtyard, also standing outside the gates. Not inside, because you couldn't sit inside. Now 1 second. The other day we said there were 7 gates in the Azara. Why are we saying 5? So the Rambam immediately clarifies. 2 of the remaining gates were already taken care of. Because the Kohanim were standing guard over the other 2 gates, the gate going into the Beis HaMikdash and the gate of the Nitzutz of the spark. Those 2 were 2 of the Kohan's places. And therefore there was really 7 gates. The Leviim took care of 5, the Kohanim took care of 2. In total you have 18 places where the Leviim are standing guard. Now it's not so relevant to the Pshat and the Rambam, but I want to just deliver this point because it's a very revolutionary talk of the Rebbe. The Rebbe analyzes this halacha in light of its source in the Gemara, where the Gemara also has a similar question between 2 Mishnahs. One says there was guards at 7 gates, one says there was guards only at 5 gates. So how do we resolve it? And Abaye's answer seems to match the Rambam's answer. That there was really 7 gates. 2 didn't need guarding because the Kohanim were taking care of it. Rava has a different answer where he says that it's an argument, whether there were 7 gates or 5 gates, and they accept that halacha is that there's 5 gates. So the Rambam in halacha, whenever we have Abaye and Rava arguing, we always like to rule like Rava. The Rambam would seem to be following Abaye here, which is a problem for a halachic codifier. And the Rebbe has an approach where he says that obviously nobody's arguing in fact. It's called a machlekes b'metzius. We don't do that. We don't argue about facts. 5 gates, 7 gates. There was a definite number of gates in the temples. Matter of fact, it wasn't 5 or 7, it was 13. There's another Mishnah which indicates that. The difference between 5 and 7 is how many gates had the halachic status of a gate. In terms of guarding, in terms of other halachas that are relevant to gates in the Beis HaMikdash, like having a mezuzah on it, etc. And there, even Rava would agree that 7 gates had the halachic status of a gate, needed to be guarded. It's only that 5 of them were taken care of by the Leviim, and the other 2, even Rava agrees, were taken care of by the Kohanim. And the Rambam indicates this in his very precise language. 2 halachas ago, when he was talking about where the Kohanim guarded, he used the word beis hanitzutz, beis hamoiket, in the structure of the nitzutz, structure of the moiket. Here he says the Kohanim were covering the gate, the shara moiket, and the shara nitzutz. Why? Because the Rambam is alluding to this concept of the halachic gate. He says 5 of the gates were taking care of the Leviim. The other 2 gates, even though they had the halachic status of a gate and should have been guarded, they were taken care of by the Kohanim standing in the beis hanitzutz, beis hamoiket, already took care of the shara nitzutz and the shara moiket. See the Sikha at greater length in Likkutei Sichos volume 18. Halacha tes. V'oid shemrim, furthermore, the Leviim stand guard. We said 18 places, but before we said 21. So where are the other 3? B'lishkas hakarban, in the chamber of the sacrifices. One of the commentaries explains this to mean the chamber of the sheep in the beis hamoiket. Ubelishkas hapareiches, in the chamber of the curtain. Commentators say we don't know what this is referring to. The achere beis hakapeiros, and behind the Holy of Holies, over here. And so you have 21 places of guarding for the Leviim. Halacha yod u'ma'amidin memuna echad al kol mishmeres hashemrim. There was one appointee who was in charge over all the guarding sets of the Kohen Leviim guards. The ish har habayis hayanikra. He was called the man of the Temple Mount. Al kol mishmar u'mishmar kol halayla. His job was to go around and visit every guard group all night. Va'avukais dlukais lefanov. He had torches lit in front of him. V'chol mishmar she'enei oimid v'oimer loi. Ish harabayis shalem alecha. Any group that wouldn't immediately stand up and say, "Man of the Temple Mount, peace unto you," nikar shu yashin. It would be obvious that they were sleeping, and therefore chayvtei b'makle, he could hit him with a stick, or the shus hayale lisref as ksusei, and there was permission even to burn their clothing. Ad shehayu oimrim b'Yerushalayim, and the noise would be so big till they would say in Jerusalem, "Ma kol ba'azara." What's the voice? What's the sound we hear coming out of the temple courtyard? Kol ben Levi loikel begadav nisrafin sheyashin al mishmartay. It's the voice. It's the sound of a Levite getting hit and his clothing getting burned because he fell asleep on duty. No such thing as falling asleep. Halacha Yud Aleph says that Rambam b'shachar, in the early morning, kaidem sheyala amud hashachar samuch lei, just before the dawn would break, Yavai hamemuna shel mikdash, the appointee who was in charge of the daily service of the temple, would come. He would knock on the door by the Kohanim standing guard in the Beis HaMikdash, in the chamber of the fire. They would open it for him. He would take the key. There was a key right over here, in one of the tiles in the floor. There was a big key. Which he would use to open the small gate between the Beis HaMikdash and the Azara, the temple courtyard. He would then go in from the Beis HaMikdash to the Azara. And the Kohanim would enter after him, holding 2 torches of fire in their hands. They would divide into 2 groups. One group going to the east and one to the west. They would check the entire Azara, entire courtyard, till both groups would merge at the place where the pancakes, the daily pancakes for the Kohen Gadol sacrifices were made. When they both reached each other, they would say, Shalom, Hakel Shalom, peace, everything is peace. And they would stand up, the people who were in charge of making the Kohen Gadol's pancakes, to make those pancakes. This order was followed, this procedure was followed every night, chutz milei Shabbos, except for Friday night. She'ein biyadam or, they wouldn't hold fire in their hands. Elobeitkin baneres hadlukin sham me'erev Shabbos, they would use the candles that were lit from before Shabbos to check the Azara instead of holding the torches. Which raises a major question. The Kesef Mishnah asks the question. Holding a torch is only what's called a shvus, a rabbinic ordination. It's not a biblical prohibition. In Halacha we rule, ein shvus b'mikdash. In the Holy Temple, there was no such thing as rabbinic ordinations in place on Shabbos. They followed only biblical law. So why wouldn't they check on Shabbos in the very same way as during the week? So one answer is, if you could avoid it, you still should avoid it. The Rebbe says, no, that cannot be. We find many instances where even though they could avoid different situations, they would purposely violate rabbinic ordinations. Another answer is that if you're going to consistently violate a rabbinic ordination, you should avoid consistently violating it. It's going to be every week. The Rebbe says no. We have other instances where they consistently violated rabbinic ordinations. So that can't be it. And besides, there are other questions. The Rebbe first wants to know, how is this last two halachas connected to the laws of guarding the Beis HaMikdash? This is like a morning ritual. Put it in the laws of the morning service in the temple. And the Rebbe explains that the same way that the guarding of the Beis HaMikdash was there to express the honor of the temple, so in the same way, this checking that was done at the end of the night was mainly to bring out the honor of the temple, not to check for dirt. Which is why, by the way, at the end, they didn't say everything is in order. They said everything is peace. It's more of an honorable expression. Knowing that, let's examine something else that we know about honoring the temple. When it came to Hanukkah, there's a famous question: why didn't they light the menorah with the impure oil? What's wrong with impure oil? Impurity is overridden when it comes to the community. Why'd they wait for pure oil? So one of the answers given is that to show that Hashem cherishes the Jewish people. Yes, the service itself is technically allowed in this way. But if we can bring out how much Hashem loves His people, we would do that. Hashem would make a miracle to have the oil last 8 days so as not to have to use more impure oil. So maybe, says the Rebbe, that when it comes to honoring the Holy Temple, we don't want them to have to come on to violating rabbinic prohibitions. We should be able to do it in the most honorable way possible. Which is why the Rebbe explains that Rambam divides us in two halachas. Even the Rambam's division of halachas is super precise. Why did he divide the Shabbos checking from the weekday checking? Because the Shabbos checking is a higher level of honor. Every day they check the temple to add in its honor. And on Shabbos, the greatest honor was expressed that they didn't even have to violate the Shabbos in a rabbinic way. And that's the ultimate ending, the ultimate conclusion of these laws, the highest level of honor for the Holy Temple. That's one approach the Rebbe has. In the same sikha, the Rebbe offers another approach, which ties into a general question. When building the temple, you weren't allowed to build on Shabbos. But once the temple was built, Shabbos was basically violated all the time. Every sacrifice is a violation of Shabbos, so to speak. It's a mitzvah to actually sacrifice sacrifices in the temple on Shabbos. And the answer to resolve that question is that only once you're working in the temple can you violate rabbinic ordinations. But if you're talking about establishing the structure of the temple, it cannot be established in a way that runs contrary to the Torah's commandments. And so therefore, since the honor, as I spoke before in this class multiple times, since the guarding, and the whole honor of the temple was to enhance the structure, the cheftza of the Beis HaMikdash, so in a way, this checking at the end of the night was literally an extension of the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore it couldn't be violated by a rabbinic prohibition, because it's part of building the Holy Temple, which, by the way, literally connects the end of the halachas with the beginning of the halachas. And the very first halacha that Rambam said, the mitzvah is that there should be a Beis HaMikdash. And that's right linked to the last halacha, which is based on that, because there's a mitzvah to have the structure, so every law involving the enhancing of the structure had to be in complete alignment with Hashem's will. On a mystical level, the Rebbe says, this last halacha talks about Mashiach. Shabbos, Mashiach is called Shabbos. On Shabbos, there's not going to be any new light produced. It's all going to be reliant on the lights that we lit before Shabbos. The work we did before bringing Mashiach, that's what's going to propel us into the post-Mashiach reality. May it be speedily in our days. Amen. Brich Rachamana Desaya, and blessed is Hashem who grants us assistance. Mazal Tov for concluding the laws of the Holy Temple.